I want to welcome you really heartily to this event. From today, exactly in 3 weeks, the 8th of December, it will be 30 years since there was a group of people who talked and decided the dissolution of Soviet Union. Certainly one of the most important and most decisive geostrategic decisions of the 20th century, or you could say of modern history. And it is a really great pleasure for me that we could organize, especially with the help of Ambassador Martin Seidig, this event and bring the signatories of this dissolution accord here to Vienna. It certainly is a more or less unique opportunity. And I want to welcome, of course, not only the participants, but especially also our speakers. And first of all, I want to say it's a great pleasure for us that we can welcome the prominent speakers from the 3 countries that decided to dissolute, 3 out of the 4 countries who had decided in 1922 to shape Soviet Union. And then it was Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine, the representatives of those countries in 1991, who decided to dissolute this organization or this country. And it's my really great pleasure to welcome Witold FOKIN, the Prime Minister, a former Prime Minister of Ukraine. He's already sitting on the table. He was together with President Kravchenko. Also, President Kravchenko was already ready to come, but he was hospitalized and at the end could not come at this opportunity. For the Russian side, it was on the one hand Yeltsin, President Yeltsin, and on his side the Deputy Prime Minister Gennady BURBULIS. And we really want to welcome him and say how glad we are that he came. We will have the opportunity to listen to Stanislav SHUSHKEVICH, the former head of Belarus. Via video, he could not come, but in his place, there will be Piotr Kravchenko, the former foreign minister and the one man who more or less did the writing work for this dissolution paper. This will be a discussion of the signatories. And we are looking forward not only to listen what were the backgrounds, what were the motives, how was the situation when this was organized, but of course we also want to listen to some other people in order to get a little bit out the perspectives from the Western side. And in this respect, it's a real pleasure for me to welcome our former Chancellor, Wolfgang Schustel, who used to be minister at this time when the dissolution process came on. On his side is Horst, the former security advisor for Helmut Kohl, and also the first head of the Munich Security Conference, a man who certainly was in the center of all these speeches. Then we also have Thomas Graham. He is a senior advisor for the dialogue of Humanitarian Dialogue Center, and he is an outstanding academic teaching at American universities and so on. And last but not least, we also will have Christian Wehrschütz, who is more or less every day either in Ukraine at the Russian-Ukrainian border or in southeastern Europe in the region of ex-Yugoslavia. Certainly a man who knows the situation much, much better than most of the others. I want to welcome also, of course, our guests, participants. I only see a few, I can see a few ambassadors, former ministers, at least some I do have on my list, but I think we should try to go immediately into the center of these presentations. And maybe before we start and ask the signatories about their experiences, I just want to make a very short recall what happened. It was on the 8th of December 1991 when the signatories of the three states decided to dissolute. And they did it due to the possibility the Soviet constitution had or presented as a possibility to dissolute the state, to cede more or less the organization. And certainly this was something that was not easy for them. It certainly brought a geostrategic situation that changed almost everything. It changed the geostrategic position of Moscow, and on the other hand, it created new countries, new nations, new nation states. And this was only not really the beginning, because the Baltic countries had already left Soviet Union a few months before in summer 1991. And a few weeks later, also the rest of the states, the South Caucasian countries and the Central Asian countries followed. With the Alma-Ata Protocol, they decided, at least 11 out of 12, also to found new national states. And this certainly has not only brought a completely different geostrategic situation also for Western Europe, because from this moment, the danger of a military invasion from the eastern flank for Central or Western European countries did not exist anymore. Certainly one of the most decisive moments in the security or in the history of European security. On the other hand, of course, it's also the destruction of an entity in economic, cultural, and social ways that does have and will have consequences. And when we talk about this today, this shall not only be memorizing what has happened 30 years ago, but we have to be aware that we still are living in a period where we are probably at least partly affected by what has happened then. When we now are informed that just 2 days ago the foreign ministers of Germany and France asked the Russian government for reluctance, for retainment. They asked for more transparency due to the fact that there is a concentration of troops alongside the Ukrainian border. When we are informed by the media that there are Russian bombers, aircraft bombers, very close between the Belarusian and the Polish border, this certainly reminds us that it is of extreme importance, not only to talk about what is going on now, but to try to understand what has happened, what are the consequences, and what we can do in order to get out of it. Insofar, I'm very sure that this can become a highly interesting evening, and I just want to go over. The first panel will be moderated by Ambassador Seidik, And then the second panel will be moderated by Director Ambassador BRIX. And dear Emil, I ask you formally to say a few words of welcome to us.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I can start where Werner FASSLABEND finished. It is a discussion about a momentous moment in world history, and we are proud that we can be hosts here at the Diplomatic Academy, the Vienna School of International Studies. Actually, we seem to be a good place to discuss disruptions. We had here Mecha and Klaus sitting 25 years after the disruption of Czechoslovakia, and we very often discuss here the disruption of the Habsburg Empire after the First World War. But with the Soviet Union, it's something different because it's so close, actually, to our present day. When we think about 18 countries are the consequence of this signature 30 years ago. In the Austrian case, after the First World War, it's about 10 countries which came out of the Habsburg monarchy. But here it's 18 countries. And one of the big achievements, and I guess we will discuss it tonight, was that it was agreed that there should be territorial integrity of the countries coming out of the Soviet Union, and that it should be done, everything on consensus. And as we know, these 30 years have shown that you can promise something in a document, but then the question is of the implementation and what it really means. And just to remind us all, if for those who do not recall this, already in 2005, President Vladimir Putin called the dissolution of the Soviet Union the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century. Actually, he followed up in 2018 when he said, actually, if he could do something, what we would do, his answer was, want to rebuild the Soviet Union. 2018, at a speech in Kaliningrad, he said, if he could do it, he would rebuild the Soviet Union. I guess these are the issues we are talking about. It's not about small-scale internal affairs. It's about really geopolitical issues that we are discussing here, and 30 years is not so far away, actually, when we do this. My real feeling is that when we discuss all the problems and conflicts that came out of the dissolution, one thing we should always keep in mind, to my mind, because maybe not the signature, but the happenings of the years 89 to 91 signaled the end of a second world, of the communist world. And that's something actually we should be proud of. Maybe we discuss it afterwards also when we speak about the Western perceptions. It was the end of the communist world with all the problems that come out of a less stable political situation. But at least here at this school, we teach our students that we should be proud that we were able to achieve this in an almost peaceful way. That's why I'm very happy to host you all here, and I'm much looking forward to our discussions. Thank you very much.
Yeah, next welcome will come from David HARLAND. David HARLAND is the Executive Director of the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue, and they certainly did a great job in assisting not only from the organization but also by spending some money, because you can imagine this was more than one organization could afford in this moment. So far, we are really thankful. Please, your words of welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm actually probably the one in this room who knows least about these events, but I have to say that Martin Seidek introduced me to President Kravchenko a few months ago, and I couldn't resist. I'm so sorry he's not able to be here. I know he wanted to be here. But I must say that I couldn't resist asking him a little bit about that day. And I must say I was astonished as a relative newcomer to the events. You know, he described, you know, the general context and which, there were maneuverings against the role of Gorbachev. The three came together, who we're about to hear from. And at least as he recalled it, there was a sort of moment of hesitation at the beginning. They looked at each other. Yeltsin came in late. They weren't sure. Somebody looked at Yeltsin. Yeltsin said, well, let's have a drink. And they got down to it, and then the drafting, which we'll hear, was done. And then there was a pause, and Kravchenko said, and somebody said, we better tell Gorbachev, yeah. And they realized they couldn't do that very easily. And then there was a follow-on discussion in which they decided they would explain things to then President George H.W. Bush. And then Martin will recall that President Kravchenko said they had this sort of farcical moment where they did manage to get through to the US president, but he wasn't sure whether it was a prank call or not. And so, one is struck again by, Hegel's description of, the great man, and whether or not the events call forward the people or the people generate the great events. And, I've almost never come across a sequence of events that, appear so contingent and yet have such sort of colossal impact on world history. So it's a great pleasure for me to be here with those who were participants in the event, and to have supported in a small way. And on with the show, we're very keen to hear the participants from those incredible events. So thank you very much all for coming, and thank you, Martin Seidel.
A very nice good evening to everybody. Thank you very much. It is indeed an unbelievable pleasure, honor to host everybody here. I hope that we will soon also have Stanislav Stanislavich SCHUSSKEVICH. We already see him here. Я вас приветствую, сердечно приветствую сейчас у нас на экране. Вы хозяин был, вы приглашали.
You have been the host. You invited everybody to the Belovezhskaya Pushcha in Belarus, and this was a big event in history. It's a great pity that you, Mr. SHUSHKEVICH, are not able to be present here today with us. I know you wanted to, but unfortunately, your doctors recommended better not to go on such a trip right now. But we are very happy to be able to talk to you via the new technologies. I am convinced that you all came here in order to hear all those people who were part of this important process. Those are historic personalities that actually made history. They made history.
To see those who have made history with us. Было вот подписантов 6. Из них лично сейчас.
So there are two people present here now, Mr. FOKIN, the former Prime Minister of Ukraine, and Gennady BURBULIS, the former Deputy Prime Minister of Russia, and he was a close aide to Mr. Yeltsin back then. So Mr. SHUSHKEVICH was head of the parliament of Belarus back then, and he was also head of the Belarusian state starting from '91, if I'm not mistaken. I have a small curriculum vitae here. I would also like to welcome now the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Belarus of this time, Piotr Kravchenko. He was back then the first and the last Minister of Foreign Affairs of the USSR. After that, he became a Minister of Foreign Affairs of the independent Belarusian state. He is not a signatory of the accords, but he is a participant. And he played an important role in drafting this important document. I would
the participants of our discussion. I think it is important to understand the background of each person, the background of those who made history. Stanislavich SHUSHKEVICH was born in December 1934 in Minsk. He is a doctor of physics and mathematics. And he was the head, as I already mentioned, of the Belarusian parliament, and thus head of state of Belarus from 1991 to January 1994. And he was the chairman of the Supreme Soviet and then also head of state. He was the key architect of the Commonwealth of Independent States, of CIS, and he signed together for Belarus the agreements together with Vyacheslav Kebic, the then Prime Minister of Belarus, who left us last year in December. So Kebic was with Mr. SCHÜSSKEVICH, the signatory. Stanislavich SCHÜSSKEVICH is also the head of the Social Democratic Assembly Party of Belarus today. So he is also politically active even now. I would like to turn to Witold Pavlovich FOKIN, the former Prime Minister of Ukraine. Witold Pavlovich was born in October 1932. So we can really be happy to have him here and to have his readiness to come and join us here and to be together with him. He has he comes from the area of Zaporozhye, and he has graduated from the National Mining University of Ukraine in Dnipropetrovsk. He started as a miner, and for a very big part of his life, he was then in the management of different coal mines, especially in the Donbass. So he knows the Donbass really from his personal experience. The Donbass that is so problematic as we know today, and I know that personally very well. Then Witold Pavlovich made what I would call, and I allow myself to say that, a Soviet career. He joined in 1971. He joined the State Planning Commission, Gosplan of Ukraine, and was in 1990 the head of the State Planning Commission. Then he became Prime Minister of Ukraine until 1992. He is still very much active in Ukrainian political life, and he was also a member of the Ukrainian delegation to the Trilateral Contact Group on the conflict in eastern Ukraine last year. So really, we are extremely happy to have, as I already said before, to have Witold Pavlovich here. Gennady Burbulis. Gennady Burbulis, as you realize, has a Lithuanian name. From his father's side, he is of Lithuanian ancestry. His grandfather was during the First World War, still in the Russian Tsarist Empire, exiled to the Urals. He was born on the 4th of August 1945. Imagine, just right after the war. I know somebody who sits here who was born even a little bit earlier, just right at the end of the war. It's Wolfgang Schustel, who was born on the 7th of June 1945. But it is something really special if you are, really come to life right at the end, after the end of this horrible Second World War. He grew up in the Urals, studied philosophy, and finished the studies of philosophy at the Ural University. He was as we know, he was one of the main architects of Russian political and economic reforms. He was a close associate of Boris Yeltsin, and as I already mentioned, held several very high positions during the first Russian government, including state secretary. He was, in still Soviet times, he was the head of the Interregional Deputies Group, which was the first organized opposition in the Soviet Union, and he was one of the prime catalysts of democratic reform in 1989. He served as the Deputy Prime Minister until 1992, and was then 2 terms in the Duma, then Deputy Governor of Novgorod Oblast, and represented the Novgorod Oblast in the Federal Assembly until 2007. He is at the moment the head of an institute on cultural dignity, on the culture of dignity, not cultural dignity, on the culture of dignity, Kultura Dostoinstva, and is a very influential intellectual even in nowadays in Russia. He signed the Belovezhskaya agreement on the part of Russia, together with Boris Yeltsin, who left us, as we know, in April 2007. Last but not least, I turn to a participant of this process, not to a secretary, Piotr Kravchenko, as I already said, then Foreign Minister of Belarus. Piotr Kravchenko is a historian, a political scientist, and he graduated from the Belarusian State University, and was also then serving as an ambassador of Belarus in Japan from 1999 to 2002. And he is still very much an active historian. I hope I presented all your CVs correctly. And now let's finally turn, as you say, let us finally turn to the wonderful participants. K vám, moji, tak сказать, участники здесь. Большое вам спасибо еще раз, что вы.
Thank you very much that you came here and that you are ready to talk to us. I would like to ask 3 questions, and I would like to ask you to be very brief in your answers so that also the audience will have an opportunity to ask questions. So the first question is for Mr. SHUSHKEVICH. And I would like to ask you to answer all of you to this question. What were your plans when you went to the Belovezhskaya Pushcha in December of '91? What were your plans and your expectations? I'm very happy to answer to your question. I think it would be necessary to imagine the circumstances of this time. All republics had declared their independence, and all the property already belonged to those new independent republics and not to the USSR at this time. So Belarus also had a new property. It was this estate in the Belovezhskaya Pushcha. It was very nicely located. It was possible to go hunting from there. And when we were in Moscow, in Nogogaryov, we decided to invite Mr. Yeltsin to this estate, to the Belovezhskaya Pushcha. And I was asked to meet Mr. Yeltsin. I was in a very, very good relations with him. And it was very necessary, and the idea was to meet just as a tete-a-tete, and in December, Gorbachev he introduced a new draft of the Union Treaty, which we all came together in order to discuss it. But Yeltsin did not agree with everything, and then so Gorbachev actually left the meeting. We also went out of the building together with Yeltsin, and there we were together, just the two of us, without any witnesses. And this is where I invited him to the Belovezhskaya Pushcha, to Belarus, for a meeting in order to really talk about the reforms and also about economic questions. So he came with a large delegation to Belarus with experts, ministers, and many delegates. And there might be the question why it took so long from the 22nd October to the 8th of December for this meeting to take place, because we had to prepare. We also wanted to invite Ukraine officials in order to discuss the economic situation of the time back then. Thank you very much for this very clear answer.
I did one, and there is still one question today between Belarus and Russia, and this is the delivery of oil. And I think this question is not yet decided 30 years afterwards, after this event. So I now will go to Witold Pavlovich, and I would like to ask him, to answer this known question already. Thank you very much. Mr. Ambassador, dear ladies and gentlemen, I want just start with a few remarks. Well, I have some remarks also to the ambassador, because he told you when I was born, and you know now that I'm older than the others. So, and the second remark, like Piotr Kuzmich, I was one of the first and I was one of the last ones. I became the head of the ministers and the Council of Ministers, and then I became the first Premier Minister of the Ukraine. And please consider that my words, my position, maybe not, of course, correspond to a general opinion, a general accepted opinion, because I'm convinced that everybody of us who signed the agreement had his own ideas, his own expectations. Stanislav Stanislavich told you that he came thinking about oil. He was thinking about the delivery of oil. And I tell you with which thoughts I came at that time. To be quite frank, that what happened in these snowy fields of Belovezhskaya and Pushcha was not, of course, a treachery. It was not a conspiracy. We came to this place and we thought about our country. Everybody thought about his state, about his country, and we wanted the well-being of our countries. And the ambassador has told you already, and Stanislav Stanislavich has mentioned that too. Well, we did not have the intention to sign a new agreement. A lot of republics, I would like say all the republics, did not want to sign this agreement. Mr. Gorbachev was nervous, and he did a lot in order to force the republics to sign this agreement, but the question was not yet decided. And when we just proposed, I think in Novgorod, I cannot say exactly where we did this, then we came to this place not with our cars as it was normal, but we came with normal buses. And we were in these buses, and there was the president of Kazakhstan, Nursultan Nazarbayev, and everybody thought about his own situation, but we all were thinking about one thing. And of course, this influenced, of course, what we did. Well, and Nursultan told me when we saw the village, and he thought, "What do you think, Witold?" So they opened the door now so quickly, but will they also let us leave? And we were a little bit worried that we could not leave that place so easily. Of course, this was not a real danger. Our fears were not justified, and we drove back with the same good company. And I think, and I thought, shouldn't it be possible for the leaders of the biggest Soviet republics and also the Soviet Union, which is a member of the UN, to meet with Gorbachev. We could not talk with Mr. Gorbachev. And Stanislav Stanislavich, well, 30 years is a very long period, but some said, really, let's meet him. And he invited all to meet in Pushcha. And I do not know about what Gennady Eduardovich thought. I do not know about what Kevich thought and Stanislav Stanislavich. But I thought about one thing. The Ukraine had now the chance to get the real sovereignty, the real independence, and to have its own democratic socialist state. And this was just giving me new spirits. This was calming me down. And this was also supporting me to come to Pushcha. And I told you already, maybe my opinion is not the opinion of the others, but I did not think that Yeltsin, I thought Yeltsin would just propose us to have some drinks, and then there are so many legends now about this Viskoli place, and one of the legends is that we were drunk, and these people in a drunk situation then decided the fate of a big country. But this was not true. We were really working very hard. We were completely sober. But it was 30 years ago, and we were at this time young and healthy men. And after these very heavy times and during the dinner, we were drinking something. Yes, we were drinking whiskey and vodka. I think this is a normal situation. But in the morning, we were all sober again, and we worked again very hard. And we wanted to formulate, and the one who did the main wording was Gennady Eduardovich Burbulis. And we did not always agree with him. There were more, let's say, two sides. And we were going into two directions. But I really respect his practical attitude and also his cleverness, because we worked very hard, but we were also quite productive. And maybe also a few words, a few general words. Of course, for 30 years ago in Viskolas, very, very important historical events took place. And the political map of the world was radically changed. And what happened afterwards, well, I will talk about that later tomorrow when we meet again. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. I think Werner FASSLABEND talked about that already with the Ukraine. From Ukraine, also Mr. Kravchuk wanted to come, but unfortunately he talked about that already in May, and he told us that he really would like to participate, as David said already, but unfortunately he cannot do that anymore. He's in the hospital, and we hope very much that he will be healthy soon. And I will talk about that now. So now I will give the word to Gennady, and he will, I would like to say, I have seen you today at the airport, I saw you, of course, but not the first time at the airport. I saw you still when you were in the Supreme Soviet, 98, and I was observing you from the tribune. I was a diplomat at that time, and I was one of the very rare diplomats who really were sitting there. And it was very interesting at that time. And I saw at that time already that you are a very active person. Gennady, please. In this year, we have 90 years of Mr. Yeltsin. He would have been 90 years, and he was the first elected president of Russia. And of course, I really will acknowledge, and I would like if we really can evaluate his role correctly, his role at the 8th of December and what he did on the 8th of December. There is a certain universal rule. And I'm very thankful, and I would like to thank you all, dear colleagues, coming from this academy, coming from Vienna, coming from Austria. I would like to thank you for this initiative. Just to find out and to try to understand what happened 30 years ago, and not always thinking about what happened at this time, and just not let these memories distort, but just think about the culture of memories. Because memory, of course, is subject to metamorphosis, and it is mobile. And memories may change every year, every day. But a real memory is subject to metastasis, and there are some conscious and unconscious things happening, and which you do not want to tell, which are sometimes too difficult, and sometimes you open new memories.
I am very much convinced that all of us here, we are all people in history. We are all part of our generation, of our homeland, of our country. And in all of us, there is history. And your initiative is so important for all of us. I would say this is something very important in a so peaceful country like this, so that you have a wish to know more about this most important event of history in the 20th century. There have been many events. Before this, there was this Novogaryov process. Before the treaty, but there were two events that were very important for this as well. One is August, the 19th and the 20th August of 91. The coup d'etat, the August coup d'etat, which I call the political Chernobyl of the Soviet totalitarian system. the Chernobyl nuclear tragedy, and the Soviet Empire was kind of shaken by this coup d'etat. And we need to understand that on the 24th of December, when those putschists were arrested and put into prison, this is when the Soviet Union ceased to exist. So it was the 24th of August. And then there was another very important day. This is the 1st of December, the referendum held in Ukraine. Ukraine achieved its legitimacy for independence. It has striven for independence and sovereignty for many years. Now they elected a president and there was a referendum held. And in history, in modern history, this is something very, very important. And it talks of a lot of like-minded people working at this. And Stanislav Stanislavovich SHUSHKEVICH had the idea to invite us to Belarus and to solve the problems of the energy problems of the countries. And to us, it was obvious that Ukraine already was at a different stage. And the Soviet Union had already started disintegrating and actually did not exist anymore. And also Gorbachev was on a different stage. So we received a very important historic incentive from Ukraine due to this development. We had to understand what we need to do together after everything that had happened. And I'm not going to hide that Yeltsin and our group, we went together and we actually promised to Gorbachev that we would try to talk with you and with Kravchenko about coming back to this idea of a renewed union. And when we saw the categoric stance of Ukraine, they told us, we have already changed. We are different now. We are through this process. And Mr. Kravchenko, he said, actually, there is no need to discuss this. I don't even know where the Kremlin is, and I don't know a Mr. Gorbachev. I don't know him. So we don't need either of them. We are independent and sovereign. But we had promised to Mr. Gorbachev to talk to the Ukraine then president, and it turned out that no association or confederation or soft association would be possible. And here, maybe the most interesting and the most secretive idea came up. And we have discussed it very often already. The Commonwealth after the Second World War, and the empire showed the world community how a transition can be possible. And this world, common world, just the word, not the concept of it, just the word of it, was something that appealed to us. And Kravchenko and FOKIN said, just wait, wait. So Commonwealth. So this doesn't mean any special obligations. It's just about trust, about friendship, about finding new forms of dialogue, maybe even consensus. No, but without this heaviness of a union. And this, what came out of our tense work back then. I would like to say what is most important. Our life, our lives, our countries are full of suffering. They are full of tests, and they are also full of ideas, but we need to have the ability not only of political orientation, but ethics and aesthetics also need to play a role, because in such an extreme situation of choice, it's not about pragmatism and interests, but ethics, the good things, the ethics of freedom become important. And of course, there is also some aesthetic beauty to those events. Man lives in history, and history lives in man. But we need an organic synthesis. We need aesthetics, we need ethics. And I think today we could actually talk about this link between those. Thank you very much for those not only interesting, but also very deep and philosophical thoughts. Thank you very much. I would like to say, yes, I understand. You talked about the coup, and I didn't know that one could name it the political Chernobyl. I happened to be in Moscow at this time, and I cannot understand up until now how the KGB, the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of the Interior, and the Prime Minister can unite and organize a coup d'etat against the president, and do this within 5 days. So I think that this political Chernobyl is something that many people cannot understand, even today, not only here, but also in the Soviet space. But this is my personal opinion. Mr. Kravchenko, you are not one of the signatories. You just went there because you were told to do so. So what did you think back then? What was going on? What were your thoughts? Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear Mr. FASSLABEND, dear Mr. BRIX, dear Mr. HARLAND, dear Mr. Seidik, I would like to express my sincere gratitude for the organization of this unique meeting. I agree with Mr. Burbulis that the collapse of the USSR is the main event of the 20th century. So it's this krach, it's this collapse as something that was historically inevitable. So empires, they emerge and they also dissolve, they distinguish. So the USSR was an empire. And the First World War played an important role in the emergence. That is when the British Empire vanished, and also the Solidarność movement in Poland played a role, but still a collapse is the vanishing of something very, very important. It was the collapse of communism, of the philosophy, of the politics of this time. And I very well understand our brothers and sisters from other countries. And I think it is very important to mention something that was very aesthetic. When we remember something that has gone, that has vanished, then we have certain feelings. But very important is that this transition happened without bloodshed. And this is due to Mr. Yeltsin, Shushkevich, Gaidar, and Mr. Saidik. And I would like to remember these people now by getting up from our seats and remembering them. Now we can sit down again. I agree with Mr. Burbulis that we need to distinguish between the de facto and the de jure collapse of the USSR. Since December 91, the USSR de facto has not existed any longer, but de jure, the process had not been determined. So the end started not only during the coup, but before that, when a law on banks were passed in the Duma, and this was something, and this event is something that does not get enough attention, unfortunately. We don't have time to discuss this all today. But this was when the USSR started dissolving. This was in June, then the coup d'etat, and then the referendum in Ukraine. And the signatories were responsible for the de jure signing of this collapse, which had happened before. It was like a mirror showing that a political organism had died. And of course, it is a great merit that there was this de jure signing, and we were able to avoid bloodshed, a civil war, and also a conflict between Russia and Ukraine. We remember what Rutskoy said back then when he said, what we have, nuclear weapons. This was in fall of 91. And you can imagine that in the context of what is happening between Russia and Ukraine right now, what could have happened back then. And the Swedish secret services also said that a civil war is possible. I'm not going to talk about the Caucasus and the other conflicts. You know about all of them. But I would like to say that this Belovezhskaya Accords is a very bold, historic improvisation as far as the legal aspect of the collapse is concerned. Nobody thought that this will be the end. Mr. FOKIN talked about the economy. SHUSHKEVICH also talked about this. So everybody has their own approaches. But nobody thought that this empire could collapse so quickly. And we thought that we would actually discuss political issues when we went to the Pushcha. And so we actually landed at a military airport near to the
have to do some agreement. And I said, Andrei, do we have a draft? And he said, no, we don't have anything. But before that, we have to agree how we can do this dissolution of the Soviet Union. And then you and me and Gaidar, then we can do the wording. But before that, we need some agreement, and we need some wording about the Soviet Union. And so I think tomorrow we will talk about more details. But the main thing is there's 3 countries, and the leaders of these 3 countries came to Belovezhskaya to talk about the most important issue. How can we stop the crisis, the economical crisis? How can we just stop the perspectivelessness of our people? How can we stop the hunger of our army? How can we do that? And and the team who was in Belovezhskaya, these were just more or less leaders of a ship, and they knew that they knew that they have to come to the country in a few months. And we have to know, we had to think about how we could save this drowning Soviet Union and how we could just guarantee a normal and civilized dissolution of the Soviet Union, one of the biggest empires of the 20th century. Thank you very much. It was very interesting what you were saying. It was really something new for myself. Well, I think I still have 2 questions, but I will just bring them together to one question so that our audience has the possibility to ask questions. Well, the first of these 2 questions is, when you signed the agreement, then did you know the value or the importance of this step? And the second very natural questions, when we look at today's relation of the countries of the post-Soviet Union, did you expect this development, 91? And I think the second question is a very natural question, and of a person who is not a Soviet citizen. But I would like to start with Stanislav Stanislavovich. Thank you that you talked about these issues so quietly. And that's why I would like to ask you to give your answer. Well, I try not, I do not want to show myself in a very good light. Then I think some things are distorted. And I know that you also have here students in the audience, and sometimes they do not know to answer a question. So I did not know at this time the historical significance of the document we signed. And I thought that we just did our work with a good conscience, and that it will be better for Belarus, for Ukraine, and for Russia. And it happened like that. And when I just found out the significance, the historical significance, when I just left the Belovezhskaya place, then I also talked, of course, with Nazarbayev, who also want to join these political questions. So I just left with a car, and then I listened to the radio, and then I heard Yeltsin, Kravchuk, and then I heard certain versions, and I heard certain distortions. And then I was thinking, yes, I understood the historical significance. And then I understood that we did something very big. And then I was a little bit afraid, because then I asked myself, do I really have the right to sign an international document? This document is a very significant, will become legally valid. But I have to bring it to the ratification to the parliament. And we had so many communists there. We had so many people there who just were secretaries, general secretaries. And then I thought, how will they react to this document? How will they react to this situation? I was at the end of my political career, that's what I thought, but I was mistaken. The parliaments of all our three countries ratified the document, and then I understood that the historical significance of this document is a very big one. So as far as the present time is concerned, there is this kind of drug, a very horrible drug, and this is the love for power. All the democratical principles have been distorted because of that, and they are destroyed. And then we had a lot of unpleasant events because there was this drug, the love for power. And of course, this was true for many post-Soviet republics, also for the Russian Federation, for Belarus. But fortunately, we have Ukraine and we have other countries who did not go this way. And I think this distortion should be considered when you want to have normal capitalism in a country, when you really want the well-being of your citizens. And then you should also want a normal political life for every country. So I would like to answer to this question. So I think this was very interesting to listen to this discussion. Stanislav Stanislavovich also met other persons on an international level. And when he did that, I think he did not foresee everything. Stanislav Stanislavovich, we will not ask him now about this question, but there is also Lee Harvey Oswald, who went to Minsk. And when there are other possibilities to talk with him, it would be also interesting to hear his memories about Lee Harvey Oswald. But this is not the subject of our discussion, you understand that. But I can tell you it's of course very interesting to talk with him about that subject. And Lee Harvey Oswald lived in Minsk, you might know that. But I will not talk about Lee Harvey Oswald. I will go now to you, Witold Pavlovich, and I would like to ask you to answer my questions. Dear Chairman, our symposium, we called it you called it a discussion, but a discussion means different opinions, and they must not always correspond. They might also sometimes contradict. And then I propose the following. Well, I'm an opponent of this to call our agreement a commonwealth or a cooperation. Well, we met and we have shown to each other, we were persuading each other to agree. When there was the time to sign the document, then I saw that this document does not stand some changes or any changes of this agreement of the Commonwealth. What is Commonwealth? What is cooperation? We are no bubbles. And this is, of course, a kind of friendship. It is a kind of wedding. It's a kind of marriage and a forced marriage. And I think it's no coincidence that we have this book, Kapitan Roshin, and in this book it is said, so when you steal something, you have to do it, and then you have to stand it, because there were no obligations in this Commonwealth. So if you just look at the text, and then you see that the agreement was signed by the leaders of these three countries. So none of these acts was fulfilled because it was a complete incomprehensible terminus, this cooperation. I was for the Soyuz. I was for the European Union, and we all wanted to have the same. We are still striving for this union. And I ask you also, who changed the text of this agreement? I have here a brochure which was written by one of the workers of Mr. Kravchenko and his delegation, and he is a very dignified person. He is an academic. He is a wonderful biological scientist, Golubets. And I will now translate from the Ukrainian.
On the 8th of December, we, with Krzyzanowski, the ambassador of Russia, we were in the main part of the building, and together we intended to finalize the document The draft was already pretty good, but the name sounded as follows: Agreement on the establishment of the Union of Independent States. And union is something that people knew too well already, the terms union. And there was the proposal to call it not union, but rather Commonwealth of Independent States. And the translation into English was Commonwealth, and our proposal was accepted. I would say that very often people do things they actually are not able to do. But a specialist, a scientist, a biologist undertook to do something to a document. Unfortunately, it was not the best thing he could do. So, what do I feel about this document? Well, I need to say I don't feel happiness. The collapse of the Soviet Union is seen by many with happiness. They are glad. They thought that the world would be better, that it would be safer. Others expected the contrary. There were those who said that this is a successfully implemented program of the American Secret Services. I, on the other hand, am convinced that the Soviet Union as a historic phenomenon just had come to its end. There had been two deep changes in the world, and it would not have been possible to maintain such a construct. And Mr. Shushkevich said, yes, the government of Ryzhkov didn't want to share its powers with the republics. And in the 50 post-war years, lots of great changes had happened. And therefore, time was ripe to change something. And I acknowledge that the letter of March was sent to the Politburo, to Kotygin, and this has a great political impact. Authors of these letters were famous people, such as the member of Academy and Nobel Prize winner Andrei Sakharov, and also the physicist Valentin Turchin, and the historian Medvedev. I heard of this letter already when they were just drafting it. Why? Because one of the signatories was my brother. Valentin Turchin is my brother from my mother's side. And I met him in Moscow incognito. And he was one of the founders of the Helsinki group. He was in opposition to the government, and we discussed the issue all night. And I said that I didn't agree in many things with him, but when I read the letter in its final version, I understood that one can be a heartfelt patriot of one's country, love one's country, and in the same time criticize those who are in power, because those in power were not competent. They did not allow the exchange of information. They were very totalitarian, and so on and so forth. We will discuss all of this tomorrow in greater detail. And so those authors, they sent the letter, and Sakharov was sent to Gorky, and Valentin, he was a doctor of physics. He was one of the constructors of nuclear power plants. He worked 7 years in a production fabric due to this letter. When I signed the accords, I said, I am not happy, but I think for Valentin and for his cause, this is very important. But I felt very sad because the political map of the world had changed and a superpower was going to vanish. A superpower which actually was a counterweight to the other superpower, which was important in international politics. And so this was something that happened, and I understood that a country was actually vanishing, the people of which had actually suffered so much. And one of the most important things was the victory over fascism. A country vanished from the map. A country I served many, many years, and I hope you can understand my feelings. Thank you. I am very, very much, I can feel with you, Witold Pavlovich. 30 years, every day, every year, people always ask in Asia, in America, in Europe, what did you think when you signed this? What did you go through? So I feel very close to what you just said. For a normal person, this is a tragedy. And if this tragedy happens due to one's own actions, and if there are sanctions to this, this in the end means to all of us that it was an optimistic tragedy. Why? There are very interesting coincidences in history in Russia. 300 years ago, in November, Peter the Great announced himself Emperor of Russia. and the country became an empire back then. An empire that was welcomed by many countries of the world. There was the victory over Sweden. So this happened 300 years ago. That was when the Russian Empire emerged. And I would like to emphasize something that is very, very difficult to talk about here at this meeting today. The Soviet Union was an empire that was inherently totalitarian. It was established during the time of the terror, and it was necessary to illustrate or to solve this situation in a positive way. The collapse of an empire does not happen without consequences. A collapse of an empire is always linked to great threats and dangers, with a great impact to the people living this. And there is this post-empire syndrome. And we know what kind of impact this had on the republics in the post-Soviet space. But we need to be very attentive here and cautious. But because the collapse was historically necessary and inevitable, because we were wise enough and we were bold enough, and we were also wise enough to know that a collapse, an unmanageable collapse, would be too dangerous. And we were bold enough to formulate in the preamble the most important thing of this, the union of the Soviet Socialist Republics as a subject of international law, and the geopolitical reality ceases to exist. This is your sentence. We actually told the people, 250 million people, and we told the entire world that it ceases to exist. So this is a legitimate process, because those three countries, they went through a very crucial and a very difficult phases. And those three republics, they say this not only to themselves, but to the entire world community. This means, in some way, this process of needs to be
succeeded. I just want to say only one position. So here from 8 to the 9th of December, with all our founders, we agreed in principle that the Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan will just give their nuclear weapons to Russia as a successor of the Soviet Union, as a successor in the UN. So you are happy people. You live in neutral Austria. And we were remembering today with Viktor Pavlovich when just imagine, think these were nuclear weapons in different forms than they were in the Ukraine, in Belarus, and in Kazakhstan. So in this relation, we did something very great, and which was practically not possible to do. And third, well, we stopped, we just stopped the Soviet succession. Well, you saw in Yugoslavia what can happen if you have a certain legal construction and if this is not considered legal and there are no legal successors. But now the last item, we showed to the whole world our values, our principles. And these 8 articles of the agreement which we could formulate, which we could create together, these 8 articles have shown the values and the aims, the targets on which we will orient ourselves and our obligation towards each other. And in this historical significance, in December of '91, the Cold War was finished, was stopped. Dear Witold, the worst thing for me was when in Camp David '91 in February with Boris Nikolaevich and Bush, there was the meeting, and President Bush, when he signed the declaration at the end of the Cold War, and then he said he did not think about the moral consequences, and then he just declared that the United States have won the Cold War. Nobody can be a winner of the Cold War. This is, of course, a common process which is developed together. But a very important moment. Today, we have 2021, and today we have other threats. We have threats, we have things threatening us, and I would like to really want to thank for this initiative, dear colleagues, to think about the bad things which happened, and also to understand how difficult it was to have to get this freedom, and to understand that there are no politicians without ethics, and there is no ethics without the beauty of decisions. And my target today as a scientist, and I really would like to call myself a scientist, and Stoic, because the Stoics of the old age, they just said, as their maxim was, to do what has to be done, and what will be, will be. Today, this does not work anymore. Today, this is not correct anymore. We have seen quite a lot during that this does not work in these 1,000 years. And our aesthetical position, I'm really moved by our meeting today. Do what is necessary, what you have to do. And you must hope for something. You must do what you hope for. And then you have to do what you have to do. And then do what you are dreaming about. Do what you have to do. And then it will be the thing which about we dream. And think this is the spirit of our belief, to believe each other, to be dignified, to trust each other, to think that the human people have a future despite all threats. And I'm quite sure, and I'm convinced, and I'm more convinced because of your initiative, because of our meeting today, and I would like to thank you very much. And I would like to thank also FOKIN, and I will just promise with him together that tomorrow we will have to tell you also some more interesting things. Now I would like to continue in English.
That the United States won the Cold War was done on the 25th of December, right after Gorbachev had his speech on the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Gorbachev caught Bush at the Christmas turkey. And there was not very much time to formulate a reaction. What came out was this wonderful declaration with this unbelievable, effect that the US had won the Cold War. Because if you have a winner, you always have to have a loser. With this declaration, I think many people have lost. Unfortunately, he repeated it, as Gennady said, in the State of the Union declaration on I think it was the 20th of January, 1992. I think this is, a horrible thing that we carry in our rucksacks for long, and a complete misunderstanding of what really had happened in the Belovezhskaya Pushcha. Allow me for this, Tom, I hope you don't mind that I was saying this. So that's, but now.
We are people who live, and we are no automatic people. And what happened in Belovezhskaya was for me also difficult. First, I had the feeling of relief. It was the end of anarchy. It was the end of non-determination. It was the end of having no perspectives. The second feeling was sad feeling. And because it was the country of my youth. It was a big country. It was a great country which gave a wonderful education to all of us. I do not agree with Reagan that the Soviet Union is the empire of bad and of hell. No, it was a wonderful, it was a great country. And of course it had black and white sides. It had negative and it had positive sides. It was a country of our world. It was a country who won against fascism, who flew into the cosmos. And I think it was a very emotional moment. We finished our work at 4:30, and on the 7th of December at 10, we had the final version. So, and we were working during the whole night then, and then we stated that at 10 o'clock in the morning, there should not be there should be a certain document. And the leaders of the state said, yes, you have to do this document, but the main idea is the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And we finished the document at 5:30. And we had then the first draft. And a main role was playing Gaidar. I will talk about him in more details. We had 3 final versions of the project and of the agreement. And then there was a 4th version, which was then developed by the leaders of the state. It was Gaidar, Kozyrev, myself. And the Ukrainian friends had the academic Grisar, and they and the Russian delegation with me at the head, we agreed the first version of the agreement with the Ukrainian specialists, and we did this at 9 o'clock in the morning. And the Ukrainian delegation just had one change, one amendment in this agreement. And so the word Soviet Union as an independent country was not mentioned in these three versions. Nobody agreed that this agreement should be called, that the new country should be called Soyuz and not independent state. And there is also an archive of this agreement, and I can imagine that this document is a very valuable one. And all these versions started with the word Commonwealth. And the Ukrainian delegation, when they did the paragraph phrasing of the second version, they only had one amendment. In the first version, it should be called the Commonwealth of Democratic Countries, SDG. And the Ukrainian collegians said they would have never agreed with the word democratical, and they just insisted to change the word in the Commonwealth of Independent Countries and not democratic countries. And I have copies of this document, and we just canceled the word democratic and we inserted the word independent countries. And then when we have printed the document, Kozyrev, Golubyets, Gaidar, they did the paragraphing of this document, and then they gave the document to the leaders of the state. And this work was then done until the 8th of December. So this was the history of this event. So at 5:30 we finished our work. I went to my room, I laid down, but I could not sleep and I did not want to sleep. And at 6 o'clock in the morning, there was I heard the Soviet Union hymn in the radio. And I stood up and I listened to the hymn of the USSR, of a country where we were born, where we were educated, where we became people. And I repeat again, this was a very difficult feeling. But as an historian, I understand that USSR will be always written in golden letters in the history of Belarus, because the Russian Empire and we will be always part of the Russian Empire.
Thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. It is difficult to generalize the opinions here and to give an appreciation of this. But I think there is something that is common to all of you who participated. Thank you very much to all of you for your participation. And I think there is one common thing. The Soviet Union just had come to its natural end. Why did this happen? I think We haven't received an answer to this question today. There might be different opinions on it, but a fact is that it had come to its natural end. And then the decision had to be made how to be with this for the future. So everybody has their opinion, their interpretation. And I felt like in a film of Kurosawa, where there are different views, but still we need to live together. Thank you very much for this. Tomorrow from 10 o'clock, there will be an opportunity to ask questions to our participants from those countries.
We will have the three gentlemen who are here for separate meetings, and not together, each one separately. We start at 10 o'clock with Witold Pavlovich. We have at 11 o'clock Mr. Burbulis, and at 12 o'clock Mr. Kravchenko. So this will be tomorrow. Each one of them in the, not here obviously, but in the Musikzimmer here in the Diplomatic Academy. Please come, take advantage of this opportunity. And what will be important to say, tomorrow we will apply Chatham House rules so that we can really have an open discussion. With this, большое вам спасибо. Прошу вот всех сейчас уходить от...
And I would like to ask you to step down from the scene here, now from the podium.
After such a moving presentation, I have to disappoint you. We have only people who were not present in the forest of Belarus. But we have an excellent panel of people who were active at the time or are observing what's going on since the year 1991. And I'm very happy to announce each of them. And first one is Wolfgang Schustel. I don't have to introduce Wolfgang Schustel here in Vienna to anybody, but maybe the interesting thing is when this negotiation in Belarus or in Russia, in Soviet Union took place, he was Minister for Economic Affairs in the Republic of Austria. And so he already at that time certainly had some ideas about the situation of the Soviet economy at the end of the Soviet Union. And later on, he had to deal with what happened there. Our second panelist, Horst TELTSCHIK, and he has already been mentioned, welcome as well. Former head of the Munich Security Conference, it was said from 1991 to 2001, something like that, a long time he was head of that. But maybe he's even better known for his time as security and foreign policy advisor of Chancellor Helmut Kohl, mainly dealing with the East, I would say, in most relations, about the Polish-German relations, about the inner German relation, but also accompanying Kohl to the meeting with Gorbachev. Yeah. At that time, talking about Deutsche Wiedervereinigung and issues like that. Horst TELTSCHIK later on became active in the business world, and he's now still working as a consultant, advisor in many functions on many boards, as is Wolfgang Schustel, by the way, also east of Vienna, on many boards. And then I'm happy that we have Thomas Graham with us. Thomas Graham is not only one of the leading analysts of Russian affairs nowadays, but he used to work in Moscow as a US diplomat. He was a civil servant for the US Department for something like that.
I was a diplomat, Foreign Service.
Diplomat, Foreign Service for about 10 years or something like that.
10 years.
And he was in Russia at the time of the end of the Soviet Union also. We were twice in Moscow. And Thomas Graham is a distinguished fellow of the Council of Foreign Relations, and he works for Henry Kissinger Associates. And he is regularly teaching on Russian affairs from Yale to Harvard. So you mentioned the schools he has been teaching on. I'm about to ask him whether he would also give a talk here at the Diplomatic Academy. I have the chance here to ask you directly. And finally, we have Christian Werschütz. I think this is an important part also of our discussion, because Christian Werschütz is a distinguished journalist, and he has been working for the Austrian radio television for 30 years. 30 years is a long period. And the main reason why we asked him to be on the panel is that after all his ventures in the Balkans, he also has to work in the Ukraine. I think he opened the office of the Austrian television in Kiev, and he's still regularly reporting not only from the Donbass, but from the whole Ukraine. And he is something like an enlightened observer in the Austrian journalistic world. So the panel is there. The topic is known. It's about the dissolution of the Soviet Union from a Western perspective. And there I already have my doubts, and maybe also my panelists, whether there is or has been a Western perspective on what was happening in the year 1991, and actually until the present time, whether we have a common Western perspective on these 18 states which came out of the Soviet Union. And so my first question really goes to what is your feeling about this Western common perspective? And more concretely, what did you think in November, December 1991 when you heard about the dissolution of the Soviet Union? Did you think it was a momentous event, that what happened there, or were you not surprised because actually it was the end of an empire which, as we heard, could be expected to happen? So what was your feeling about this dissolution in 1991? Wolfgang Schustel, I would like to start with you.
So first of all, let me really say to the previous panel, great respect, really great respect, how you explained the situation and how you worked out this agreement. This is from today's perspective. Imagine what could have happened. That you mentioned the Yugoslav war, 10 years, 91 to 2001, a bloody war with tens of thousands of people killed, and the problems are still not over. Or imagine the conflicts coming from after, because if an empire falls, you said it, Gennady, if an empire falls, this is a giant falls down to earth. The earth trembles. And a lot of conflicts originated at that time are still there, not either frozen conflicts or still warlike conflicts, Nagorno-Karabakh, or conflicts which were at that time present in your mind, I'm sure. The Crimea case was present at that time. I remember decisions in the Russian parliament was avoided in your talk, by the way. It would be quite interesting to hear a little bit about that. So imagine what could have happened if you were not able to dissolve the Soviet Union in a peaceful way with common values, etc. So I think this is absolutely astonishing and earns greatest respect. And I think we should really say that in public. A second point, I think we were not aware, like you, that you were not aware about the historic situation at that time. That everybody is, politics is always local and always regional. Everybody was more or less obsessed with our own problems, domestic problems, economic problems, social problems. Of course, it was for us not a catastrophic moment. Everybody felt the Soviet Empire came to an end, as you said it. It was over. It was just over. But the historic consequence, the geopolitical consequence was not at all. We were not prepared for that. America was not prepared, otherwise this kind of an hybris talk like we won the Cold War. I mean, strange. That, or Obama later, Russia is only a regional power. I mean, this is a kind of an hybris which is not adequate to the situation. So we were not prepared. The West was not prepared. You were not prepared. That you just did what you dreamed of, what was necessary, what you hoped for, and I think a lot of hopes were fulfilled. Not all of them. Not? Also some fears came true. And I think, so in my opinion, we should really a little bit decent and humble, because what was achieved in these times was Gaidar was mentioned, and I think really Gaidar was one of the greatest Russian politicians I met, and I know him. He's not very popular even now in Russia, but a great man, and others also great people who are not really well known and well estimated in today's politics. So I think this meeting today and tomorrow is also something to put the developments in a new, old, better perspective. This is what I want to say at this moment. It's really hard to discuss after such a brilliant exposition what happened in these times 30 years ago. But I think we could and should learn. We younger, I'm not young, but younger than you, except Gennady. But what really the younger generation, political generation, could and should learn from your experience and your role model.
Thank you. Thank you, Wolfgang. The German perspective, I guess, was a little bit closer and less local than the Austrian one, because for you it meant a lot what was going on at the end of the Soviet Union for the future of Germany.
Yeah, well, first of all, I would like to join Prime Minister Schustel in complimenting our Russian guests and may I say friends. It was really moving how you tried to explain to us the situation when you took the decision to give up the Soviet Union as a common state. End of 90, I left government, having unified Germany peacefully. That was good enough. Therefore, I left. But I tried hard to stay in touch with all my Russian friends over the years, and I had the opportunity when Putin came into office. I was asked by him whether I can meet him sometimes and discuss international affairs. And what I learned from the very beginning, he had one main concern: how to keep the new Russia together. Mm-hmm. You see, with all the republics. Yeah. For example, he, as you know, he changed the constitution, because at the beginning the republics were able to choose their own governor and to elect him. without any influence of Moscow. And he was afraid that oligarchs would buy the job of governors and would do their own business, whatever Moscow might say and think about. And therefore he changed the constitution. Now Moscow is deciding who can run for governor and who will be the next governor. Therefore, there was still a concern after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, will Russia dissolve? And I do believe that's still a topic for President Putin. You have to manage it. We know it from Germany. We have several states as well, and to keep them together on a federal level is a difficult job. And if you look at the big Russia, it's an even tougher job. Another problem I'm aware is the settlement of Chinese people in Siberia. I had once a discussion in the Kremlin, how many Chinese are already settling in Siberia. We have information that meanwhile about 2 million Chinese are settling on Russia territory. Well, I was told, no, not so many. It's just 200,000. But even 200,000 is a hell lot of people. I remember a discussion with the president telling me he never will sell gas to China. Meanwhile, he does. The question is, what I tell my Russian friends all the time, the safest border you have are with us, not with China. The last military conflict you had was with China. And as you know, the Sino-Soviet conflict between Khrushchev and the Chinese, sorry, I'm getting old. The Chinese Mao, yeah, thanks, Mao. The main conflict was that Khrushchev was not ready to join Mao during his war with India at the Chinese-Indian border. And if you look at China today, they have still fights with India on the border. And therefore, the question from the very beginning was, what's the future position of Russia? And I tell you, I had a speech in Vienna once, together with the former American president, who was invited by a economic newspaper here in Vienna.
Clinton. Huh?
Sorry? Clinton. Yeah, Clinton. It was Clinton. I was asked by the newspaper to start with the speech, and then Clinton will give the main speech. And he got 120,000 euro. I got nothing.
Should we collect something?
My salary was...
Should we collect something?
I was seated beside him during dinner. And I raised a discussion, I raised a question about the relations with Russia. And he told me that he twice offered to Yeltsin to become member of NATO, of the North Atlantic Alliance. He wrote him a letter, and he discussed it with him. Yeltsin's answer at that time was, it's too early for us to decide whether we should join NATO or not. But this offer was even on the table with Putin at the beginning. And when I was asked by him to discuss what he should say in the German Bundestag, parliament, the German parliament, my proposal to him was to define the future position of Russia on a global level. Is Russia part of Europe, or are you separating from Europe? And what your president nowadays seems to try is to tell the public we are world power and our main partner is China nowadays. I'm not sure whether you will be comfortable in the long run with China. That's not an easy partner. But it's still a question for Russia where your position is internationally. And Putin's speech in the German Bundestag, he tried to define the Russian position. He has said, Russia is a friendly European country, whatever that means. Yeah, and I think we started in that direction between East and West, but meanwhile, I think we have not enough contacts. We have not enough exchange of people on all levels. I'm in favor of exchanging peoples on all levels, whether youngsters, pupils, scientists, cultural people. You see, our main orchestras are conducted by Russian conductors. The cultural exchange works very well. We have more than 100 partnerships between cities. I think this is the right way to move ahead. The question is, what will be the position of Russia? And you will see after Afghanistan, you will face a lot of problems with Afghanistan because the drug traffic will go through Russia, mainly. Once you had the problems with AIDS, a similar situation. It's now improving. But my main concern is, where is Russia really going?
You're already taking up the second part of our discussion because we are among ourselves. What did you feel the moment you heard that the Soviet Union is dissolved?
Well, first of all, I was happy that I happened to go to sauna with Yeltsin and Helmut Kohl. An unbelievable picture. And this was my first relief. No. The first interest was this crucial question. What can we do, and will we do all we can do to integrate Russia into Europe, becoming part of European affairs? And it started in the right way, but it stopped. You see, we have had, before the conflict in the Ukraine started, we had a wonderful proposal on the table. an all-European free trade zone from Vancouver to Vladivostok. Yeah? Why didn't we move forward with this great idea? I believe the Ukraine conflict wouldn't have come up at that time when we were successful, and the Russians were in favor. The Europeans were not good enough to push it forward.
Yeah, that's what Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin said at the Munich Security Conference in 2008, I think.
Well, look, I invited Putin to Munich. He had 2 invitations, one by the Swiss organization.
The World Economic Forum?
Yeah, the World Economic Organization, and the second one by me. And he told me in Moscow, if he will come first to me. And he did. And if you read his speech in Munich, it was a summary of all his concerns vis-à-vis the Europeans. And there was no real answer on that. The German Chancellor gave a speech before him proposing to intensify the relations between NATO and Russia. But nobody asked her, nor the Russian president, what they think about it and what that really means concretely. And therefore, it was a proposal by the German Chancellor Merkel without any response. And if you read Putin's speech, he was summing up all his concerns with the Westerners, with the United States, with the Europeans. My foreign secretary, at that time it's now the federal president in Germany, he gave his speech a day later without mentioning with one word the speech of Putin. There was no response at all. And one journalist stood up asking the president, was your speech now the beginning of a new Cold War? And these were the headlines in the German newspapers, international newspapers the next day. Absolutely crazy. And look, his follower was Medvedev. Medvedev gave a speech a year later in Berlin, proposing a very good idea from my point of view. He proposed to negotiate the Paris Charter of a common Europe from November 90 into a treaty. There was no response on the Western side, neither in Germany nor in Europe, never, nowhere. And you can't deal with a country like Russia just not mentioning anything what they are proposing, not answering anything. Mm-hmm. And my foreign secretary a day later gave a speech talking, 2/3 of his speech talking about environmental problems, climate change and such things. And I told him immediately that he should change his job, becoming a minister for environmental issues.
He changed.
Not anymore for foreign affairs. Yeah.
President.
And dealing with our Russian partners that way, a former or still a world power, you are still a world power concerning your armament and nuclear power. You can't deal with Russia that way.
Yes, so this is also the perspective that you hear from the Kremlin today, actually. I guess Thomas Graham will have a bit of a different view on 91 and on the Western position. So did the US win the Cold War?
First, let me add my compliments. The first panel really was terrific and quite moving in a description of their own personal experience. And I think none of us really appreciated the depths of your own emotions as you dealt with what was a very, I think, troubling and difficult experience as you sought to build yourself a better world. Let me answer two questions that you've asked. First is, were we surprised in November and December of 1991? And then the second question about whether we won the Cold War or not. You know, I don't think that the United States was really surprised by what happened in November and December. Now, you know, the specific events, yes, we hadn't predicted. But, you know, I had been working in the embassy in Moscow 87, 88, 89, 90. And we had a wonderful set of contacts across the country, the Soviet Union. And we were reporting back to Washington, I think as early as late 1988, certainly in 1989, that we needed to think about the possibility of the breakup of the Soviet Union. We saw the various national movements in the Caucasus, in the Baltic states, the Russian Declaration of Sovereignty on June 12th of 1990 was also an indication that things were moving in a direction where we needed to give serious thought to the possibility of the breakup. And as early as 1989, back in Washington, the Deputy National Security Advisor set up something that we called the UNGroup, because the group wasn't supposed to exist. But it's a very small group of senior officials drawn from the National Security Council, the State Department, and the Defense Department, the Central Intelligence Agency, to think through what the consequences would be of growing destabilization and even potential breakup of the Soviet Union. Now, it's something that we didn't want to contemplate, and certainly if you ask the President himself, his senior advisors, it was something that we weren't seeking, and we weren't pleased by the prospect of that happening. So there was a tendency at the very highest levels to ignore what was happening at a somewhat lower echelon in the government. Now, President Bush clearly did not want to see the breakup of the Soviet Union. We didn't want to see the breakup for some of the reasons that I've already mentioned. Empires don't collapse peacefully, usually. We've already seen violence in Karabakh, for example. We saw later in 1990 what the Soviet state did to the Lithuanians and the Latvians because of their effort to move towards independence. And we thought that was a precursor of what would happen if the country actually came apart. The August Push itself, sort of a revenge of the Soviet state against what was happening in the country. And so I think we were legitimately concerned about that, and add to this is a country with thousands of nuclear weapons spread out across the country. So how are we going to deal with that? And that is something where we Americans thought we always had a special responsibility. We would talk to our European partners about it, but we dealt with the security relation, the nuclear relationship with the Russians first of all. And then there was another personal aspect of why President Bush didn't want to see the breakup, and that was he was doing quite well with Gorbachev, thank you. You know, we had done German reunification, for example. We had worked with Russia in the first Gulf War. We had an arms control agreement that we were negotiating with Gorbachev. And in many ways, Gorbachev, through his policies, was advancing what we saw as an American agenda in Europe and globally. So why did we want to see this man disappear from the political stage? That said, I think as the first panel indicated, we really saw the August Push as the end of the Soviet Union. We began to talk about the former Soviet Union directly after that, and we began to put in place some policies that we hope would answer our concerns. One of the first things President Bush did after the breakup of the Soviet Union was announce a presidential nuclear initiative where we unilaterally decided to withdraw many of our tactical nuclear weapons from our naval vessels, submarines, and so forth, in the hopes that the Soviet Union would respond in a similar fashion, because one of the things we wanted to see happen was these tactical nuclear weapons, the ones that worried us most, not being scattered across 15 republics, but reconsolidated in Russia under some sort of secure control, to lessen our concern about that. We also moved after the dissolution, the formal dissolution of the Soviet Union, to make sure that the 4 countries that had strategic nuclear weapons signed on to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. We also were very happy and worked to bring those strategic weapons back into Russia under Russian control. And then the final aspect after the breakup of the Soviet Union was a clear indication that we didn't want to see the resurrection of the Soviet Union, is our Secretary of State made a tour of all the newly independent states, and we established a process by which we recognized and set up diplomatic relations with all of these countries in very short order. So it wasn't as if we were surprised to some extent, but it isn't as if we hadn't thought about this before, and much of the literature that suggests otherwise, I think, is mistaken. Now to answer the second question, President Bush, throughout 1989, revolutions in Eastern Europe, the fall of the Berlin Wall, always made a point in his conversations with Gorbachev that I didn't gloat. I didn't want to make things more difficult for you. When the Soviet Union finally broke up, then it comes out. We won. If you look at his State of the Union in 1992, we won the Cold War. But you have to remember the domestic context. This was the beginning of a re-election campaign, and he wanted to present a successful foreign policy at this point. And there's one other aspect to this as well that I think was quite popular in the United States at that time. We need to remember that the 20th century really was a century of a titanic struggle among different philosophies and ideologies: fascism, communism, and liberal democracy. And certainly the prevailing view in the United States, 1989, 1990, 1991, is that with the breakup of the end of the Cold War, the breakup of the Soviet Union, that was a victory for liberal democracy that came 44, 45 years after the defeat of fascism in the Second World War. And that, I think, inspired a lot of the way we dealt with Russia after 1991. We saw those events as a vindication of the American model. And we wanted to work closely with Russia. We wanted to integrate Russia in the Euro-Atlantic community. We wanted Russia to undertake democratic reforms and free market reforms, because if they did, that would only further, I think, solidify or validate what we saw as a verdict of history. So partnership became a very important element of the United States after 1991. I think it's unfortunate that we talked about about a victory in the Cold War as if we won defeating the Russians. One of our ambassadors at that time has written a long book about the end of the Cold War, and the point he made was the end of the Cold War is a negotiated settlement. Gorbachev, the Russians, played an integral role in doing that, and we need to separate the end of the Cold War from the collapse of the Soviet Union. And if we do that, we can see that we actually had partners in Russia in ending the Cold War, and we need to think of that as a common victory and not as a victory by the United States or the West largely construed over Russia.
Yeah. But as you said, you saw it a bit like Francis Fukuyama. You saw the end of history, that democracy has won at the end.
Absolutely.
And secondly, if I would be a Russian observer, I would say, so why did you then expand the NATO to the east? when you were so much interested in working with Russia. But this is not my question.
But because we didn't fully trust the Russians, that's the...
Because you didn't trust the Russians.
Very good question.
Christian Werschütz, as an Austrian, I think you're more pragmatic on these issues than talking about the geopolitical side of it. What is your take on 1991? How did you experience that, and how did you see what the West did afterwards?
Look, first of all, 1991, I was 30 years younger, and my younger daughter was almost 3 years old. We had already, and you must not forget, this the bloody breakdown of the former Yugoslavia. And we should also not forget that when we were talking about the dissolution of the former Yugoslavia, it was always, we must not allow independence of Slovenia and Croatia because this could have a negative impact on the Soviet Union. Then you had the peaceful breakdown at the end of the Soviet Union, but you had the bloody breakdown of the former Yugoslavia, which Richard Holbrooke mentioned is one of the greatest failures of Western policy after 1939 or 1940. So the feeling was, thanks God, it was peaceful on the one hand. On the other hand, you know, there is one question, one of three questions Immanuel Kant, born in Königsberg in Kaliningrad, has raised, and this is the question, what can we know? And I think to a certain extent, in the years before the declaration of the 8th of December, in the West there was an underestimation about the decisive role Ukraine was playing in this drama of the breakdown of Soviet Union, maybe without mentioning Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was most likely well aware of it. This is the one reason. And the second point is also the question how you can influence processes. And as Mr. Graham has mentioned, his former ambassador, Jacques Matlock, who has written the famous book Out of the Unknown Empire, and I had the chance to interview Mr. Matlock now for 50 minutes about this breakdown. Please allow me to make one quotation of this interview, which we did with him, because this is related to the question, did we win the Cold War? First, I would like to mention, he was referring in this interview that since July 1990, he was writing about the possibility of the breakdown of Soviet Union. So it was not a surprise for the United States, but then he was referring to the question of the Cold War, and he was saying here, and I quote from this interview, President Bush made a speech in Kiev on August 1st, 1991, recommending that Ukraine and the other non-Russian republics, aside from Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, that they adhere to Gorbachev's Union Treaty. Of course, that appeal fell on deaf ears. That was not something that we could control, but I do think that today, when too many people are talking about, oh, we won the Cold War, no. We negotiated an end to the Cold War, which was as much in the interest of the Soviet Union, and it was to the United States and to our European allies. And I think it's a pity that, and Mr. TELTSCHIK has referred to it, that we lost to a certain extent Russia, if we may say this. And if you look now at the situation, it is clear that we are, at least since 2014, on a very, very confrontative approach. And Mr. BRIX, as you mentioned, NATO enlargement, Mr. Matlock thinks this was a mistake.
Thank you very much. We couldn't avoid already speaking in the first round about the present and the future. So we have time for a short second round. That's about the relations nowadays. What is the consequence? 30 years is not long, as we know. Transformation takes time. Look at Poland, look at the Czech Republic. We all feel that Hungary, there is still transformation going on from the old system to a new system. So what is your take on the situation now in the post-Soviet space? We are only talking about Russia, but actually there are so many countries which are in the post-Soviet space, and how you see the perspectives from our side of cooperation today. Wolfgang Schustel, I would love to start with you.
No, the first question is, I think one of you mentioned, so that there is a genuine link of an empire to authoritarian structures, autocratic structures. And I think this is something which cannot be solved from outside. That we can criticize, we can analyze the situation, but so to say, the change must come from inside. So this is something what we learn, what we have to learn. Maybe a bitter lesson. Regime change is not possible from outside, and is not good. A change in values, in perspectives must come from inside. So there is the situation in Belarus is for us, seen from outside, is terrible, absolutely terrible. The situation in Russia, economically, politically, is not what we hoped for. And I'm fully on the side of Horst. So the first 5-6 years of Vladimir Putin, I had the same experience like you. I was skiing with him in Arlberg, and we had very interesting talks. And exactly what Horst said, he was interested to bring Russia into the European area and to reform the economy, etc., etc. And the question for us is, when and how did we lost Russia, or how and when changed Russia's perspective on their own position? This is not easy. I don't want to go along with this self-blame game that we are guilty. I think this is something both sides have to think about what happened and how can we change it. And short answer from my side, I think we are now in the lowest point of bilateral relations with Russia. That's for sure, and nobody would disagree. But I'm a stubborn optimist. This must not be forever. I think we can change it from both sides. If we move in a positive direction, if we offer something, and if also from the Russian side, there are signals and ideas and incentives to change the situation, we should be open. And there's, for instance, the European Green Deal. This is my Russian friends know it. I think this could be a game changer, because European alone cannot change the situation, cannot solve the climate situation. This is absolutely impossible. We have 8% of our CO2 emissions worldwide, and Russia has a huge potential on that. Largest country, CO2, CCUS strategy, hydrogen production, forestation, etc. So I think a lot of cooperation is possible. So are we able and willing to change from confrontation to cooperation? There must be an offer from the European side, and hopefully a positive answer from the Russian side. I think the recent speeches of Vladimir Putin were quite interesting on that. So there is really now a change going on inside the Russian economy, inside the Russian political scene. Prime Minister Mushkin also used a quite interesting wording on climate change. And of course, on the political situation, the same. I mean, Ukraine, for me, from seeing from outside, it's absolutely strange to see that the Ukrainian population was always pro-Russian, like the Belarusian population is always pro-Russian. So why the hell is, so to say, the present situation, the present policy of the Kremlin de facto alienating the Ukrainian population from Russia? And I'm also not sure how the situation is in Belarus. This is not by far not perfect. So I think, and by the way, the interesting thing for us, the change 30 years ago was not forced by an army, not by a single soldier, not by a single shot. It was changed by politicians, by personalities, and by the will of the people. That the Berlin Wall was not destroyed by the West German army or by NATO. No, by average DDR citizens who want to change the situation. So this is the interesting thing. So Russia is such a huge and interesting country with such an enormous potential on talents, on culture, as you said it before, on perspectives, on resources, etc. You have a choice. Russia has a choice and we have a choice. Either Russia wants to become the junior of China, like Robin versus Batman, good luck, or to be on equal footing a partner, a good partner for the European Union, and of course also for Americans and others. And by the way, it would be good for America and European Union to treat Russia as an equal partner, as an interesting, respected partner. And of course, not to mention Ukraine and Belarus, etc. This is, I'm very happy, for instance, that Bundeskanzlerin Merkel rang the telephone with Lukashenko. And she was criticized, interestingly, by the new incoming coalition. And why the hell? This is not according to our rules, our values. This is, so to say, appeasement. Why? Talk. This is the result. This dialogue is the only way if you want to avoid a military conflict. And as you said it, you had the interest of your people in mind when you went to this strange forest in Belarus. And having the interest of our people in mind, this is first peace, welfare, positive perspective, family life, etc. This is what we have to, and to save the planet, of course, as well. This is what we have to have in mind. And it's not contra our own national interests, but it would also serve, so to say, the common interest on the global scene. I think it's quite easy. As a stubborn optimist, I say, the pessimist is the only Mist, auf dem nichts wächst, bitte das zu übersetzen. So this is the pessimist is the only garbage, but nothing can grow. This is a German game, a German Wortspiel.
Thank you very much for that. But Sergei Lavrov once said to me, I'm not paid for to be an optimist.
But Sergei Lavrov is sometimes...
He can be quite cynical, yes.
Yeah, no. I think he's a kind of a masochist sometimes.
Horst TELTSCHIK, from the German perspective, you already said that we have similar things to Wolfgang Schustel, actually, that we should be as open as possible for the dialogue. But still, we have Russian soldiers in the post-Soviet space in so many countries. And if you ask the governments in these post-Soviet countries, they would give you a totally different answer. What should we tell them?
Well, I think we haven't praised our Russian, I'd say, friends at that time, in 89, 90, 91, what they really have done. We have unified Germany. There was no a single shot, peacefully, yeah. And your president at the time, he said in May '89, and he gave a speech in Mainz in Germany, saying that he will not question the legitimate security interests of Soviet Union. This was a very important promise, yeah. And he dealt with Gorbachev and yet always on the same eye level, yeah. And you have had a president telling the public Russia is a regional power, yeah. And your current president, when he was vice president, he gave a speech in Lithuania saying that Russia, what was his sentence? Russia is economically a poor country, similar to that. You see, such public statements are terrible for our Russian partners. and you can't deal on the same eye level if you tell your partner publicly all the time you are weak, you face a hell lot of problems, and so on and so on. And it was President Bush as well who said, 91, we need a new world order. And you see, Bush Jr., when he was president after 9/11, he said, we will go for a worldwide alliance against terrorism. NATO immediately responded. The second one was Putin. Putin saying, we will join such a worldwide alliance against terrorism. And even China did it. But then you intervened in Afghanistan and in Iraq, without consulting anybody. Yeah?
The British.
The British, yeah. And I think these are developments missing opportunities. Yeah? When Putin said, I will join such an alliance, I would immediately have started to think about how we can manage it. Yeah? But giving no answer at all, that's not the right way. And look, we signed, all 27 presidents and prime ministers have signed a charter in Paris of a new Europe. And if the substance of this declaration was a common European house, as Gorbachev said about it, a common European house where every inhabitant has the same security, gets the same security guarantees. And we agreed on the principles, how to shape it. We agreed on procedures, how to move ahead, yearly conferences of the foreign secretaries, after some time, conferences of the prime ministers and head of governments, and we have still in Vienna.
Still, we have the OSCE actually,
yeah, you have
which has been created for this cooperation.
An institute for crisis prevention here in Vienna. But do we hear anything about it internationally? Nothing for decades. Why did the prime ministers and presidents don't meet on that level and say, let's take, how can we move ahead? Why did the foreign secretaries don't meet once a year saying, what can we do? The same with NATO. You see, the NATO secretary has sent all Russian diplomats back home, saying they are spies. They are just spying. Well, it's crazy. Each diplomat, even Americans, if they get secret information, they will take it and use it. Yeah? Sending all Russian diplomats back home means there are no contacts anymore between NATO and Russia. Why?
Yeah, well, maybe Mr. Graham should respond to that immediately and try to explain how he or the US sees these sort of relations.
I think, as a matter of fact, it's the Russians that closed down their mission in NATO. It may have been a response to certain diplomats being ejected for one reason or another, but the Russians exercised the initiative in saying these contacts were no longer useful. That's neither here nor there. Let me make sort of a larger point about the relationship with Russia. from both the American standpoint and I think from the larger Western standpoint. You know, I think the period in the late Soviet period, the early 1990s, when there were such hopes for cooperation between our countries, Russia, the other countries of the former Soviet space, is something of an aberration in history. The fact of the matter is that our relationship, the US relationship with Russia, has been competitive more or less from the moment the United States has emerged as a great power on the international stage at the end of the 19th century. And we're separated by differing worldviews, geopolitical interest, and different values that inform the structures of our domestic political systems. I think if you look at this from the European standpoint, I don't think that I'm wrong in saying one of the big problems of European history, for at least the past 200 years and probably longer, is actually how do you integrate Russia into the European space? Because you sense that it's alien in some way, but you understand as well that it's critical to your own sense of security. And those problems can continue till today, and I think we're seeing that played out in the environment today. There is a danger in assuming that we should be able to cooperate without recognizing the differences. Because then when we fail to cooperate, we don't see that as a consequence of different national interests, different histories that we have to manage in some way if we're going to survive. We begin to see that as a moral flaw in one side or the other. We certainly do that with the Russians, and you see that in the demonization of Russia in American politics today, but the Russians do it to a certain extent with us. I won't speak for the Europeans, but I think something similar happens here. So I think it's important if we're going to move forward and build relations that are constructive, is that we acknowledge the differences, we try to understand where those differences come from, and then say, despite those differences, there are reasons why we need to cooperate on certain issues. There are areas where we're going to continue to compete. We need to compete responsibly so that we avoid the types of catastrophic conflicts that serve the interest of no one. So I would urge a much more sort of realistic assessment of where we are in the world, not trying to paper it over, not talking about a situation in which we all should be able to cooperate. I mean, even if you look at climate change, I think what Putin has said recently is encouraging. But we think about different climate changes in different ways, and the consequences for climate change are going to be different from the United States, different for Russia, and different for Europe. It is an existential threat of some sort to humanity as a whole, but states focus on specifics and not sort of the general. They have to defend their own interest. And so if we assume that it's going to be an easy path to cooperation on climate change, I think we're going to find ourselves disappointed, and that will lead to accusations of bad faith. So I think let's approach this with a sense of humility, with a sense of there are real differences that we're going to have to manage. We look at the world in different ways. There's nothing immoral about that, nothing necessarily wrong about that, but it does complicate the role of governments and of diplomats to manage what is an increasingly complex world. So that's where I would leave it.
Thank you. It's good to have a journalist at the end. So how to deal with differences? You journalists like differences and clashes and conflicts. So what's the future?
No, to a certain extent I agree, because it is clear that the presidential election where you have a second round is the best for journalism, whereas to do a story about Bosnia and Herzegovina, this is a nightmare for a journalist who has 2.5 minutes to do such a story. But I would, may I start with one you said at the beginning, 30 years is not a long period. I completely disagree. 30 years is an extremely long period if you are looking from the perspective of a simple person. A person who was in 1999 or 1991, 25 years, and there was in April 1992, it was first time in Ukraine. And they saw the optimism. We have everything. We can build a successful country. And then until 1998, I was each year in different parts of Ukraine. and I have seen how the optimism was vanishing away. Voucher privatization, or what you had, Kuponi, Kapovanci, whatever you had. And if you are living now in such a country, and I'm living there, where the Red Cross is not coming anymore because hospitals are so filled with COVID patients that if nobody is dying, you have no space. And where you have an enormous pauperization of people, of pensioners, then for these guys, I have never seen that they were talking about geopolitics. They're thinking about how I can survive and I can make a better life. And you have this enormous mass migration to Poland, to other countries from Ukraine. You see it also in the Donbass. So I think we must be aware that these countries have to solve their own problems, but people will maybe have a better idea about what is democracy if they had the chance to live in democracy countries, not in a kind of robber baron capitalism they have faced within the breakdown of the Soviet Union. This is the one point I want to make. Secondly, it was Gorbachev saying, Общий Европейский дом, common European house. And what I guess the Russians have really the right feeling is, okay, we have this common European house, but we decided you are living in the basement and we are living in the bel etage. And this is not really very, very smart politics. On the other hand, you must see that there are principles where really Russia in Europe could show that it's ready for compromise. And this is mainly the Eastern Ukraine. I completely disagree that here you have only to blame Russia, because you must also see, is Kiev ready to fulfill Minsk, what was done since 2017 with more or less blocking economic and relationship with this region. But this is maybe the litmus test, the main test, where you can see what can be achieved in Europe. And in this way, personally, I'm a pessimist, also it's missed, because of the real thing, each conflict who is longer than 7 years is very difficult to handle, that you see if you look at all other conflicts. And the second thing is, if you ask Martin Seidig about the Minsk negotiations, the international side was much more interested in humanitarian questions than both parties of conflict. If you are now in this region and you are looking that formally, when you wanted to go from Donetsk to Mariupol, you had to drive 90 minutes. And now you have to go from Donetsk to Milivoje, which is the most used border post between Russia and Ukraine, because the post in Kharkiv is so corrupt. Then people are staying at this border post only 10 hours to come to the other side. So we have to try to improve the living of the peoples, and maybe we can give them also some hope that so-called European values and other things will really not be something only for political speeches, but also for their daily life. And Mr. Graham, I only want to finish, realpolitik is the only real approach which you can have to solve problems.
Thank you very much. I think we have made a great round of between optimism, pessimism, possibilism, realism. We don't know how long 30 years really is. So we just heard it's very long or short, very short, sorry. We heard about empires which exploded, and we don't know whether they still exist in the mind of some people. When I listen to Vladimir Vladimirovich, I got the feeling that he feels that Russia is still an empire. But I'm a moderator. I'm a pure moderator who is not allowed to say anything like this. My only job is here to thank our speakers and to ask you for a round of applause for our brilliant speakers.